So as I'm sure you were notified through Zoom or on your screens, this webinar is being recorded. Um, and I'll share a little bit more on that in just a moment, but I just wanted everybody to be aware. Can you see my screen okay, Elizabeth? Okay, great.
Yes.
Alrighty,
Thanks.
well, we are afternoon and it looks like we have a good number already with us. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining, everybody. Your Hour with APA Virginia is generously sponsored by our longtime partner, the Berkeley Group. So thank you so much for their support. We have the lovely Elizabeth Andrews with us this afternoon, who's a dear friend of the chapter. Elizabeth will be presenting her newly developed guide, Proactive Planning for Resilience. And I'll share a little bit more about Elizabeth before I hand over things, but I just wanted to quickly run through some housekeeping items. So the CM number for this webinar is listed here. I'll also put it in the chat as always, along with the link to the AICP page or CM tracking page. Let's see. I'll also be dropping some helpful links to our website, which includes our chapter website, and then I'll also share our conference website link in the chat in just a moment. We're really excited to be in Portsmouth this July. Our conference planning team has been working hard. Right now, we're building a great set of mobile tours for the conference, and things are just looking great. So we're hoping to open up registration in the next few days. So keep your eyes peeled on that. And our sponsorship opportunities, we've been so thrilled with such a strong interest in that so early in the game. And so a lot of our exclusive sponsorship opportunities are already flying off the shelf, so to speak. So if you or your company is interested in those partnering opportunities, feel free to contact Martina, James, or myself, and I can put my email in the chat as well. So as you might have seen in our advertising of this webinar and promotion of this webinar, Elizabeth really does want this to be a presentation that's really open for discussion, open to discussion, and is looking for, engagement from attendees, and specifically related to feedback of the guide. So there will be points throughout the webinar where Elizabeth will reach out to you to share your input. And so for that reason, I'm leaving the chat box open. Feel free to put, anything in the chat box related to those discussions. But if you have specific questions, I'll be moderating the Q&A as well. And towards the end, if you'd prefer to ask your question out loud, you can use the raise hand feature to request to be unmuted, and I will unmute you to ask your question out loud. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that Elizabeth can throw up her slides while I introduce her a little bit more.
Well, actually, thank you, Jillian. That's wonderful. I'm just going to be sharing the website with you today and asking for your feedback. As Jillian said, this is going to be interactive, I hope. And so I think that I can share the screen now and show you the homepage.
Yes.
And that'd be a lovely background.
Elizabeth Andrews, our friend of the chapter, as I mentioned, who holds just such a wealth of knowledge in her field, is an environmental attorney and natural resources policy expert, and formerly director of the Virginia Coastal Policy Center at William & Mary Law School, where she led William & Mary's work on the Resilience and Adaptation Feasibility Tool, aka RAFT. Elizabeth has served as Water Policy Manager for the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality and as the Senior Assistant Attorney General and the Section Chief for the Environmental Section at the Office of the Virginia Attorney General. Elizabeth is a graduate of the College of William and Mary and received her Juris Doctor degree, summa cum laude, from the Washington College of Law at American University. So I will hand over the presentation to Elizabeth, but thank you everybody for being here.
Well, thank you, Jillian, and thank you all for coming today and attending this. I'm very excited to be back here. I was happy to co-host a series of these lunchtime webinars for you all back in 2023 with Ross Weaver when he was with Wetlands Watch, and we had an array of topics on resilience. And Jillian and Eldon were great about helping me to line up and host a bunch of speakers. So I know what a great audience you are, and I'm excited to tap into your knowledge. I am going to have a few questions for you, probably along the way, but a lot at the end to make it interactive. I would love to have you speak up, put something in chat. And Jillian, I'm hoping that you'll help me to track the chat so that I'm not rubbing my belly and patting my head at the same time here as I try to show you all the website. So to give you a little background on this, when I left William and Mary and went to the University of Virginia, I was the inaugural fellow for the Environmental Institute there, which is it's a great institute. They started to knock down the silos between different disciplines at the university in addressing different climate-related issues. And they asked me the rare question, what would you like to research? And I said, there's a lot of discussion in a very unhappy way, it seems like, about managed retreat, which is a drastic option. It's become a very politicized term. But I'd like to look at planning for resilience, which is something that local communities have been doing for a long time in different topic areas, and how there are many steps along the way in mitigation and adaptation that you can take before you get to relocation. And there's a lot of focus, of course, on post-emergency response, but there needs to be a lot of emphasis, as you all know, I'm singing to the choir, on planning, and that's such a key role. So that's why I'm excited to be here today, that you all are the heart of that can give me lots of great feedback on this, I hope. So I started out down that path of doing some research and got feedback along the way from various stakeholders that I met with that sometimes white papers end up on the shelf and don't move the needle policy-wise as much as we'd like, or they're not maybe as accessible as we would like. And so converting it to perhaps a website would be helpful. I don't know if you remember, but back when we developed the first iteration of the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, I served on the Technical Advisory Committee for that. And there was a work group that was tasked with developing a relocation guidebook for local governments. And that never actually did get published. And so some people commented to me that there was a need to put together some information that could be accessible to localities and to community representatives. And so here's what we tried to do. And here's the homepage, just to show you. The goal is to, again, set forth a bunch of information in kind of one-stop shopping. So it does cover a lot of content. And we've tried to make this as accessible as possible to organize this much information. But one thing I'd love to hear your feedback on is this well organized for us to be able to find information? The target audience, again, is local government staff, also local government elected officials that may come on here to look at particular topics or to get an overarching view. And then community leaders who want to help lead the way in adaptation and mitigation planning for their communities. So there are two ways to negotiate the site. Across the top, there are tabs that show you the different topics. And then also there are big bubbles, I call them. That's not the technical term. That's correct. But that show you across how you can access the various sections. There's the executive summary and what I call things to know. And I'm going to go through that with you because some of the feedback that I got was, wouldn't it be great if you could summarize a list of things to know that local government staff could show to their elected officials and be kind of a summary of the main topics. Like, why should we do this? Why should we get into this kind of planning? So I'd like your feedback on, are there more topics that should be included? A user guide and table of contents. And then we have 5 different steps split out that local governments can follow to come up with their resilience plan. And then some legal considerations, case studies, and tools and resources. So let me start at the top with the executive summary and things to know. And this is where we go through, what does this guide do? It provides some best practices, and I note that it's not intended to be all inclusive because resources and circumstances do change over time, but hopefully it's a source of inspiration and information. Who are the intended users of the guide, which I just went through with you all. And please note that I do refer people to the Department of Conservation and Recreation's website to look at the flood resilience planning pages and the Coastal Resilience Master Plan. This is, I will note, intended to be a statewide guide. It's not just coastal. Why use this guide? To assist in identifying risks and vulnerabilities, potential distinct impacts on at-risk communities, planning your solutions, to make difficult decisions, because as you all know, let's call it out, these are not easy decisions, and we're not going to be able to save everything in some areas. So how do you decide what to save and when and how, and come up with a plan? And then finding sufficient funding for it all. Show me the money. So here's where there's the section called Things You Need to Know About Adaptation Planning, where I try to provide an overview of some of the main points. I'm hoping this can be helpful to you if you want to take some new staff or elected officials to see some main points to go over. I first touch on the state level flood resilience plans, both the Coastal Resilience Master Plan and the Flood Protection Master Plan. Talk about what is resilience, and that's something that I want to ask you all about at the end of my talk about what do you think of when you think of resilience, and how do you approach your publics about that? I will note in that regard that we have this project that Jillian mentioned, the Resilience Adaptation Feasibility Tool. It's a 3-university partnership, University of Virginia, Virginia Tech, and Old Dominion University. And we define resilience very broadly. I'd like to call it resilience writ large, to encompass economic and social and environmental resilience, because all of that is really crucial to have a resilient community. Talking about how adaptation does not have to be a sudden change, that you could do this step by step as part of a long-term holistic planning process. And I think Jillian said that she had forwarded to you this link, so hopefully you all took a look at some of these things if you had a chance beforehand. I know how under-resourced local government staff are, so you may not have had a chance. Adaptation planning is very community specific, and that's to go into how each community has to come up with its own way of dealing with this. The concept of tipping points is an interesting one. I presented to the Bay Program's Climate Resilience Work Group about this, and they were extremely helpful. They had a lot of folks from Maryland and Virginia there in different professions. And we talked about that some, because tipping points, that's a concept that people talk about a lot. What would be the trigger that makes a community decide we've got to act, we've got to relocate people, we've got to do something drastic? And one researcher in Maryland said, that didn't resonate with communities I've worked with in Maryland, because they don't know it. They haven't lived it yet. They said, we don't know what our tipping point will be, but just help us to have a really good plan so that when we reach that point, we'll know it when we get there, we'll know it when we see it, and we can trigger the plan. So that's a really difficult conversation, worth having, of course, but difficult. And so having your different community pursue your different priorities on different timelines, that's going to be the way it is. And it has to be a community-led discussion. And give some more information here on tipping points. And we talk about a program called Adaptation Pathways, which is an approach that's been pursued in some areas as an alternative. And then talking about moving out of harm's way, because what we're doing is we're relocating away from the risk, right? When we do that. And that's for when areas just are too risky, too vulnerable. And we need to think about how do we get people away from the risk. So trying to take this in a step-by-step way and talk about the different options that are available. And I do want to note my acknowledgements here, because there were folks who gave me great feedback along the way, and I've listed them out. As you can see, it's a variety of people, names that you'll probably recognize. A lot of people very involved in adaptation and mitigation and climate resilience planning in the Commonwealth of Virginia, including the Climate Resiliency Work Group, the Bay program that I just mentioned. So I'm going to go back up to the home page. And if you have other topics that you think I should cover in that executive summary of or things to know up front, please drop them in the chat box. And I see there's some chats there that I'm going to leave for the moment and come back to them. I'm hoping Jillian is in control. And on top of that, then I'm going to go to the user guide, which is, we went from the executive summary talking about why did we do this guide to how to use the guide. Where are you in the planning process? What do you want to do? If you're at this point, go to step 1, step 2 with hyperlinks and an interactive table of contents. So you can see step 1 is the initial assessment. Step 2 is your strategy development. That is the voluminous step that was so hard to tame the beast and get all the information in that. So we actually set it up with 3 different approaches in step 2. One is reducing risk by limiting development and preserving green space in high-risk areas, if you have that luxury, frankly. A lot of places are already built out, and that's when we could talk about reducing risk with mitigation and adaptation measures in vulnerable areas, like building codes and elevating houses. I will say, I just attended last week an insurance roundtable discussion at the Harvard Bloomberg Center for Cities up in Boston. And there was an expert there who used to be with FEMA. He's now with an insurance industry building association. And he noted that so many communities across America do not use building codes to help them in this, but that Virginia does a pretty good job. So kudos to you all. I feel pretty good about that. Reducing risk with infrastructure management, transportation, wastewater, wells and water supply, stormwater, emergency services and healthcare, energy and communication networks. You all know we could have even more on the list, but try to hit kind of the top ones. And then addressing risks to cultural and historic sites, and reducing risk with green and gray infrastructure, of course, talking about nature-based features. And then the third approach is, okay, when mitigation and adaptation measures are not enough, planned relocation away from the risk. If you need to get people away from danger, then we talk about the decision to move or not, when, the actual implementation of moving residents and businesses to higher ground, the importance of ensuring affordable, safe housing in our receiving communities. Best case scenario is you could find a receiving community area on safer ground and relocate people there, not only because the local government retains the tax base that way, to be honest, but also because it helps to perhaps retain that social fabric, that interconnectedness of the community, that if they have to move far away to another jurisdiction that they and spread out, that they would not retain. Buyout programs, redevelopment or relocation of socially vulnerable communities in particular, and then some relocation challenges and pitfalls to avoid. Step 3 is developing the plan. Step 4 is funding the plan. Really important, again, show me the money. And then step 5 is the implementation, evaluation, and adjustment. So I'm going to go for the moment because everybody wants to talk about funding. So I'm going to go to step 4, funding. And again, I could go through that bubble on the homepage as well. And we have a table of contents here, talking about selecting and seeking your funding and your financing sources. There are a few things in here that I've included that I'm hoping will not be needed anymore when they've updated. There's a very comprehensive funding page in the Coastal Resilience Master Plan that DCR has on its website. When that first iteration was developed, they didn't include some things like the the revolving fund. So I just sped to the end there to show you that. So when they have that fully fleshed out, I could take that off. One thing that is newer is our Sentinel Landscapes designation in Virginia, which provides the opportunity to get some additional federal funding for green spaces that can act as flood buffers as well. Parametric insurance, that's an ever-growing issue, and the Middle Peninsula Planning District Commission has been trying for 6 years now to get parametric insurance to back up its Living Shoreline Loan and Grant Program. Data is the real holdup there. We talked about that a lot at that insurance roundtable last week. Back in 2019, I hosted a resilience funding forum at William and Mary Law School, and we had someone come from a parametric insurance company and talk about it, and that's when the director of the MPPDC, Louis Lawrence, got interested and started trying to bring it here. But the company did wind speed based parametric insurance in Florida. They didn't do flooding based, so it became a discussion for some years now about the accurate data that they need to feel comfortable to issue parametric insurance. They needed NOAA certified tide gauges, and that was a whole, I won't go into that, but that was a whole discussion. But basically, a parametric insurance issuer has to feel comfortable that they have enough data that they can feel comfortable issuing policies with certain parameters or thresholds that will trigger coverage. So a certain wind speed, a certain flood level, and that you have to have that data in place. So there's some wisdom to the Commonwealth investing in tide gauges, frankly, of the kind to give that kind of data. I think that that's a hump we have to get over in Virginia, and we have to figure that out. But that could open the door to parametric insurance from a number of different companies in Virginia. So, and links to some case studies. So the other thing I wanted to highlight to you is the Community Reinvestment Act, because that's something that maybe fewer people are familiar with. That was a law that was enacted, you may recall, in response to redlining by banks, that they would not issue loans to certain communities, and a racist-based policy. And so to try to overcome that, to compensate for that, it requires banks to fund certain things in the communities in which they're present and active. And they've had some tweaks to their regulations to include among their qualifying activities to earn credits under the Community Reinvestment Act to do some climate resilient programs. So I think that's worth looking at as just another tool in the toolbox. And then the Coastal Resilience and Trees Fund was a great thing. It's been put on pause for the moment. I've left it in here because we are hopeful it'll come back. It was administered by the Virginia Outdoors Foundation and Wetlands Watch. But because of the cutback in the funding source, a decrease in funding from deed recordation fees in Virginia, they have put that on hold for the moment. And then some additional innovative ideas. I would love to have more ideas from you all. And let me just stress that the goal here is to put some innovative ideas out there to get people talking about them. And it could be that if there's something that it could work in Virginia and enough localities are interested, enough communities are interested, then maybe VML or VACO or someone might be interested in looking at that. But just the more you get the ideas out there, the more you get people talking about them. So all kinds of different ideas that could be listed here. And a community land trust is a tool that is not used in many parts of the Commonwealth, but it could be a very helpful tool to get affordable housing, for example, in areas that are on higher ground. So I am going to go back up to the homepage again and show you the legal considerations page that I mentioned. These are Virginia specific. I was asked to write the chapter on that for that Coastal Resilience Master Plan relocation guide for local governments. So I'd already kind of touched on some of these in my head already. Unfortunately, as I said, that guide never was published, but some of the things that seem really important to cover they include the Dillon Rule. As planners, you all are very familiar with the Dillon Rule, but community leaders may not be. So talking about that and what it is and how it constrains action at the local level at times, that you have to have that authority from the General Assembly. Private property rights, eminent domain, downzoning, takings concerns, that's a very real thing in Virginia. Shifting property lines can occur actually both from sea level rise and coastal erosion and from flash flooding, as we've seen in Southwest Virginia, and it's important to recognize that. the new mandatory regional water supply planning effort. The General Assembly, it used to be that they encouraged it, now it's mandatory, and DEQ is implementing that, and you are, I'm sure, familiar with their meetings they're having around the state. Because water supply is an important aspect of resilience, and that we need to plan for that. We've always had riparian law, we've always had plentiful rain on this side of the country, but we need to be planning. We've now luckily got SWIFT to help us replenish our aquifer, but our water supply is an important part of resilience planning. The fact that we have independent cities, and that means independent from the surrounding counties, means we have independent budgets, we have independent comprehensive plans, independent hazard mitigation plans, independent bond ratings and bonding capacity. And when I was up at that insurance roundtable and I was trying to explain that to someone from one of our northeastern states, they were just stumped and said, "Wait, start again?" So they couldn't believe it. It was very difficult for them to understand. How do you do any regional planning? And I said, well, it makes it more difficult. It's another step to address. Cooperative purchasing by public bodies because of the Virginia Public Procurement Act. And here's a good example of stakeholders giving me great information. Ian Blair at Wetlands Watch brought this to my attention. And it permits cooperative purchasing where local governments could latch onto, could be a part of a planning district commission's RFP. And it could really reduce time and costs. So that's a gift to highlight, because we're always looking for funding. And downzoning treatment in Virginia courts. And then this is just my personal pet that I really would like us to, at some point in Virginia, pursue rolling easements. They can be a great flag to people who are purchasing property in vulnerable areas about what's coming and what's happening right now. And so I kind of indulge in an exploration of existing Virginia authority. Could we get to the point where we use voluntary rolling easements in a proffer setting in very vulnerable areas? So I always joke when I present that if it works, you can call it the Andrews rolling easement. If it doesn't, I'm just going to say, I don't know where you got that weird idea. That's crazy. So some case studies. We cover adaptation pathways that I mentioned earlier. The Cuba Tarea Vida program, where they acknowledge climate change and they talk about the use of nature-based features, natural features along their shoreline to deal with shoreline erosion. The Room for the River program it's in the Netherlands. They are the kings and queens of water control and management. Did that one because I was actually lucky enough to go and teach a class there. Went there a couple times, and they really they have such societal acceptance of flooding in a way that we're not going to have for many years to come, to be honest. They just have dealt with the water for so many decades. So they have come up with various tools and funding mechanisms, and it's worth looking at what they've done. And then the wampum framework is a suggested framework based on the traditional approach of tribal communities. Tools and resources. When I presented this to the Virginia Association of Coastal PDCs, one attendee said, well, this alone is worth it because there's so many of them. This is, as you can imagine, somewhat of an ever-changing landscape in the sense that we have some tools at the federal level that are being taken down and removed from websites right now. I'm trying to keep up, but they have been in some cases archived in some places that I've tried to include. But there's first general climate adaptation and resilience planning tools and resources. And I've broken these down, I should note, by federal agencies tools, and then other tools, and then Virginia specific tools. That was feedback from one of the presentations I did about this guide that I really appreciated. Someone said, there's so many tools. Can you break it down a little bit? So I did for the longer ones. Here's tools to determine current risks and vulnerabilities. Again, I broke it down by federal, other, and Virginia specific. Tools for addressing extreme heat. Sorry, my screen keeps popping as I do that. Tools to determine predicted climate-related risks. Again, broken down, Virginia. Economic risks specifically. And I'm hopeful that you can later on go back and look at these more. And there's a contact us button at the top on the right up here that if you do see other tools that you think should be included, please let me know. I would love to see more and add more. Funding. Everybody always wants to talk about funding. Can never find enough. Tools to help identify and engage with physically and socially vulnerable communities and groups that service them. And we have, I do talk a number of times about the VIMS, the Virginia Institute of Marine Sciences interactive map on the ADAPT VA website. It does include a social vulnerability layer. And then the RAFT project that I mentioned earlier, the 3-university partnership, we also have done some work that could be helpful. So all kinds of different resources, as you could tell. And then tools to assist with community engagement, because that is key. Getting the full community to participate is always a challenge, and it's an important thing to build along the way, each step of the way. Green infrastructure development. And that one, there's so many that, again, I split it down by federal other than Virginia and Virginia specific. And then tools for historic and cultural site preservation and for cemetery preservation. So I'm going to go back to the home page and look at specifically step 2, strategy development. I mentioned that that's really the super long one with a big pile of information that we tried to make digestible by incorporating these 3 approaches. So approach 1 is reducing risk by limiting development and preserving green space in your high risk areas. And we cover case studies, including flood history disclosure laws. We have not been able to fully achieve that in Virginia yet. Perhaps at some point we will. They do refer you to helpful websites and FEMA maps, but full disclosure of a residential property's flood history has not been mandated at this point. Talking about the comprehensive plan and statutory and regulatory measures like zoning ordinances, floodplain management ordinances, wetlands protection requirements, and tree protection and conservation ordinances. And then, as you can see, lots of different notes on different topics under that. I'm going to highlight this because I just received some feedback at my last presentation about adding some more about forestry and their tools. So I put that in there. So if there's anyone here from forestry, kudos to you. And I'm going to go back up to the top to approach 2. So lots of different things covered under this topic: reducing risk to buildings and infrastructure management and historic and cultural heritage sites and green and gray infrastructure. I'll touch on historic and cultural heritage sites just because I think that's not talked about quite as much. But Mandeville, Louisiana, I took a number of these photos, which is probably why they don't look like professional photography as much as I'd like, but they are they started out actually as a summertime resort community for residents of New Orleans, which was across Lake Pontchartrain. They would go there in the summertime, and it's an historic district, but low-lying and subject to flooding. And so they started noticing that they were getting, as the example on the next to last on the right, they were getting stairways going straight up, long stairways, or lots of garage doors on the front. And so they started adopting historic district design guidelines for their residents so they could end up with safer elevated homes that still have things like cars parked underneath and porch swings, and they look pretty good, but they're also safer. The Point neighborhood in Newport, Rhode Island is a sad story. It was Doris Duke paid to relocate the community that was in the way of a highway, and now they are flooding from sea level rise. So they have also adopted guidelines and raised up their homes in a very attractive way. But I will say, when I asked the docent, what are you doing about the flooding of the roads and the driveways, though? She said, yeah, that's a real problem. We're trying to work with the community uphill to get them to reduce their stormwater runoff. So again, it reiterates it's a regional effort, as you all know, often involved. And then Charleston, South Carolina, famous for its flooding as well, unfortunately, down in the historic Battery area. And they have some climate resilience guidelines they've adopted for homeowners. So continuing down, we talk about actually, there are only limited things you can do, right? You can modify and raise things up. You can relocate things. And so there's some case studies on that. It's not inexpensive, by the way, as you know, it's very expensive and it takes time and it takes community consensus if it's something that's treasured and in the community and they don't want to lose it. No easy decisions, again, to flag that. And then there's abandonment. Some of y'all may be familiar with the Keeping History Above Water conferences that they've held in Annapolis and Boston and Norfolk area. And they had one down in St. Augustine, Florida, that I went to, and they had a representative from Scottish Heritage there. And he talked about how they have so many castles on so much shoreline, they cannot possibly save them all. And it would just be too horrifically expensive. So they're having to make some tough decisions. And so this is a case study on how they've got a discussion that they have at times about are we going to put up a sign and walk away, which is a very, very tough decision, and let it just degrade naturally. That's a very tough decision, but something that we're going to be facing more and more in our areas that are subject to flooding. And in approach 3, which is relocating away from the risk, just start out calling it out. Although case studies often discuss managed retreat, in reality, entire communities rarely sell out and retreat at the same time, right? There's a lot of attrition. It could be buyout programs. It could be abandonment because they can't access it anymore. In the Middle Peninsula, they have a public access authority that receives donations of properties and that are subject to flooding at times, and the public receives access to the water through them or hunting opportunity or whatever, and the owner gets to get a tax credit for the donation so they don't walk away with nothing. That's an innovative tool. They've got, I can't even remember how many properties now because of that. So planning for relocation, it could be like in Louisiana where they are taking an entire tribal community and relocating them, but often it is not all at once. It's something that has to happen over time. And you have to build trust with the community and you have to have a two-way dialogue, all the things that planners are very familiar with. But looking, as I noted earlier, looking for a receiving area within the same locality could avoid the tax base loss that is so important to our local governments in Virginia and helps the residents to retain some of their cultural and social ties. Some people are going to remain in place until the very end due to they can't afford to move. They don't want to move. It was their grandmother's house, whatever it may be. So planning for that is an important part of it as well. Table of contents, because there's so much information here, but the decision about moving is a really tough one and lots of pitfalls to avoid. And I even have a section talking about that specifically. And talking about heirs property, which is a concept I'm guessing most people on this webinar are probably familiar with. But when the ownership of a particular property is not clear, when the taxes are paid by a group of family members, it used to be a real obstacle to getting FEMA recovery dollars, for example. And they've worked on tweaking their program for that. But it makes it more difficult, so it's something to be cognizant of. And then going beyond just easements for our adaptation tools, because those tax credits can only accrue to people who are landowners. That's one thing that we talked about, frankly, a lot last week at this insurance roundtable about the impacts to renters. That's something that's not quantified well enough for us to be able to assess the impacts and the risks. So with that, I think I've covered most of everything I wanted to cover, and I wanted to open it up to some questions from you all. But first, Jillian, I guess I'm going to look at the questions that are in the chat.
Sure, and I can
Q&A too.
it looks like there were some, maybe not questions, but some comments about suggestions about, depending, from Leah Brumfield, depending on how technical you want this guide to be, you might want to use stronger, scarier language, language that would be more impactful or easier to quote for elected officials. And I know that that was a question that you were hoping to pose to the group as well. And then it looked like there was Mary Zirkle had added to that conversation, pointing to that sometimes scarier terms can actually be inflammatory in some communities in her experience. So I wasn't sure if there was anything you wanted to add to that.
Well, first I'll say in response to those two comments together, welcome to my world. That really is puts a pinpoint on what the balancing act that I tried to walk in this, because I felt like there are people in the community that are really going to want that to happen. They want to have put that out there in the scariest terms to shake people up, to know we've got to do this planning. It's important. But on the other hand, you don't want to turn away potential readers who think, oh, you're just trying to be, you're trying to create a froth. You're trying to be inflammatory. And so try to stick to the facts as much as possible. So yeah, if you have specific suggestions of how to walk, that balancing act, I would love them. I can look at making it more blunt in terms of lives lost from, storm events. I will say, I don't even want to say this out loud, but we have been really lucky in Virginia that North Carolina bounces off some of the scary storms back out to sea for us. But we have had Isabel hit and cut across the state. We had, as you all know, we don't even have to have a named storm event hit in Virginia to have the impact. Like Hurricane Matthew. It was offshore, it hit in South Carolina, but the impacts really inundated Virginia Beach, for example. So it doesn't have to be a named storm event with statistics, like Sandy hitting New Jersey to be scary. But yeah, it's a hard walk to walk. And so I would love specific suggestions of statistics you think that would be helpful to cite that might convince local elected officials this is something we really need to address. There's a lack of data that is really true out there. And as you all know, for example, VIMS with its ADAPT VA mapping, most scientists don't like to go further than 30 years out because since the rate of sea level rise is accelerating, it's hard to be as accurate as they want to be past a 30-year mark, right? So they'll do it, but they don't like to do it. And so it makes it a little tough to bring up scarier statistics from further down the road. For visual people, such as myself, perhaps more images, diagrams, etc. Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Yes, it may be, to Catherine's question, it may be shared with others now, yes. And again, any suggestions, I hope people will take advantage of the contact us mode up here. It takes you to a form that you can fill out, and I get it. And I want to say thank you to Sea Grant. Sea Grant not only provided me with research assistants who were great in doing this with me, absolutely fantastic, law, econ and statistics, and public policy students that were very helpful, but they also housed this, created this website, and their communications director, Jay Clark, was a fantastic help with it. Stats and facts are strong. Flooding in Southwest Virginia from events has taught us all that events can and will happen. Southwest Virginia is, unfortunately, an excellent example because they did not get the individual assistance, right? They got infrastructure assistance, rebuilding assistance, and public assistance, but they didn't get the individual assistance after their strong storms down there, and they've been beaten up by strong storms repeatedly. So it is an excellent example of what happened and has happened, and how we need to have funding available to help people, because it may not always pass the FEMA assessment of what's required to get individualized assistance to people. So yeah, I think Mary is saying including more stats and facts would be good. Am I reading that correctly, Mary? Yeah, thank you, Mary. Yes, there are, especially federal web links, which can change or be removed. And maintaining a website once you create it is always a challenge with any site. Right now, the plan is for me to be overseeing an update every year, and Sea Grant has actually purchased this web domain for 10 years. And so I appreciate that and are maintaining it and updating it as I send them the changes and are archiving it actually. So that is the plan right now. I would love to, frankly, my dream come true someday would be maybe it could be something that's taken over by our state government and becomes part of our tools in our resilience website. Like DCR has all kinds of resilience materials on their website. So I think that'd be great. We do have a new chief resilience officer coming. So that could be something incorporated into if they develop a website. I don't know what the plans are for that, but that would be terrific. There's no pride in authorship or ownership. I just want to make it set up somewhere where it's the most useful and easily accessed.
Elizabeth, it looks like we have a question that had come in a little bit earlier through the Q&A from Laura Balch. Laura asks, do you see a role for MPOs or primarily just local government?
I think that resilience is something that we have to address at every layer. So whether it is planning district commissions, state government, local government, even below the local government level in individually particularly impacted communities. That's why I was mentioning earlier that community leaders are also an intended audience, and that makes it actually a little more difficult. I meant to add that earlier. If you're trying to reach elected officials and community leaders, but also the local government staff, the local government staff know the vulnerabilities of their locality better than anybody, right? You live the dream, whether it's stormwater management, erosion and sediment control, transportation, whatever it may be, the planning department, folks know better at the staff level what the challenges are than most people in the area. And so having a website to try to be helpful to all three of those groups is somewhat of a challenge, and that also led the language selection at times and how much statistics are there. That's why I tried to do that things you need to know up front, because an elected official probably is not going to very often take the time to go in and get into the statistics and the charts and the details. Giving them the big overview seemed important. And that's why it's important that I get your feedback on, am I covering all the stuff I need to cover up front in that executive summary? Is it too long? Is it too short? It's the Goldilocks approach, or is it just right? And so I would say yes, and councils of governments, every different level, I think there needs to be resilience planning undertaken. But it does make it more difficult in Virginia when we have all these different layers of planning going on to have regional responses. I'm hoping that's something that our chief resilience officer, when they come on board, can help out with. I just saw, I think something, this is from Doug Mosley, I think that something that will resonate with our municipal stakeholders is the long-term financial impacts of engaging in more proactive resilience planning and implementation, specifically insurance provision, and not just flood insurance. That's right, wildfire, for example, and impact that this can have on the local tax base, real estate assessment book, and then the follow-on impacts to bond rating. I'll get to the end of that message. I just hopped to the top, sorry. Here we go. A crucial component. Sorry, my screen just jumped again.
I can read the rest of it too if you'd like.
Why keeps jumping like that?
Crucial component of a community's fiscal health. Not sure how easy it is to discuss here, but perhaps worth a little more coverage.
Yes, thank you. And Julian, I meant to ask you, I'll get a copy of this chat later. Is that right? Thank you. So I don't have to take notes right now. Yes, and the bond rating, I have to say that is a frustrating endeavor, because in 2019 at the Coastal Policy Center annual conference, I brought down a vice president from Moody's from New York City. And we asked him because that was when the bond rating companies were just coming out and saying, we're paying attention. we're going to be looking at what are you doing about climate impacts, local governments. And we asked him, and he said, well, we're going to look at what your climate vulnerabilities are. We're not going to tell you what to do, but we're going to look and see, are you doing something? Are you doing something to address these? And so actually a city councilwoman from Norfolk stood up and said, but you keep talking about what we need to do, but we only have so much bonding capacity. We do too much and we're going to affect our bond rating. What do you suggest? And he said, I don't really have anything to suggest except maybe you could work regionally, which again, we circle back. I feel like it's a bad do loop here. We circle back to have independent cities in Virginia, which makes it harder to do that. So that's something we have to think about, that balancing act of investing enough in our communities to respond to climate impacts and yet not threatening our bond rating. There's only so much you can do before, so much debt you can take on before you impact that bond rating. So yes, I could spell that out further, I guess in the executive summary up front, just the financial challenge, the financial impacts of climate change impacts and not doing something about it. Thank you for that comment. And then, sorry, maybe if I make this bigger, it just keeps jumping. There we go. I made it bigger, Jillian. Now I can read it. I had it in this little box and it kept jumping when there was a new comment. So floods and storms are existential in the now or recent memory. Water availability in a drought is more onerous and deserving of actually more planning. Amen. Especially in the Eastern Virginia water management area. Reservoirs in a context of regional planning are needed. And so there's so much history in Virginia on that, right? You will all remember the King William Reservoir that was going to have the largest impact on wetlands on the East Coast up until that time. And it was overturned in court. It was actually going to be a water source for Newport News. And so I think that put a bad taste in many local governments' mouths to try to do reservoirs in wetland areas. You're going to have wetlands impacts. You may recall it was the Mattaponi tribe that actually won that challenge. And because the impacts on the shad fishery. And so there are more innovative things going on in that realm too. Like, for example, first of all, people are encouraging local governments to look at abandoned quarries in non-wetland areas to use as reservoirs. But it wasn't in Henrico County that developed a reservoir up in, was it Caroline County? I'm going blank right at the moment. But anyways, they release water in drought conditions through the river as a conduit. So then the river benefits too. The community, the benthic communities and habitat all along the way benefit about the release of the water. So there's some innovative ways to approach that. But yes, water availability in a drought is just one more thing with increasing heat we've got to plan for it. So that's right up front in the important things to know part. Acknowledging the difficulty of different communities having different relationships to risk, and this topic in general, an extremely high-level talking points memo targeted specifically at elected officials and/or public groups might be helpful. Thank you, Leah, for mentioning that. When I presented this to the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission Regional Environmental Committee, Ben McFarland suggested, what if you put together some short kind of sheets, almost like a flyer? It could be one for elected officials and one for community leaders and one for local government staff to target those audiences with kind of the main why you need to do this. And I think that's along the same lines. And so I actually have time blocked off this afternoon on my calendar to take a first stab at doing that. So thank you for raising that. Doug says, thanks for the follow-up. I'd be curious to see if the Moody's folks have changed their tune since 2019. The big rating companies actually purchased companies to provide them with data. But just last week, when we were talking about the bond ratings, it's still clear as mud, honestly. It's still not clear what are they going to do and who's going to be the first recipient of a real ding in their bond rating because they're not taking the steps. I've heard local government people, after that 2019 event, I heard local government people say, I don't want to compile a list of my vulnerable projects, my flooding roads, etc. Because if I don't have funding lined up to address them, then that's just feeding a list of look what we're not doing to the bond rating companies. That's scary. You don't want that to be squelching efforts to come up with a list of what we need to do. So hopefully the master plan in Virginia, the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, at least is a starting point for overcoming that. But Cobbs Creek Reservoir, thank you. Thank you, Douglas. That's what I was trying to think of. But it's a great innovation, right? That returns water to the river during low flows. That's a wonderful thinking outside the box that we need to do more. So anyway, I had questions for you all, but you've done such a fantastic job with questions for me. I told you you're a great audience. I remember that from before. So I want to mention that we have taken this raft project to Southwest Virginia now. It's a project that the three universities did in the coastal communities first. We've developed a scorecard to assess how resilient communities are in the sense of how much do they incorporate resilience into their plans and programs and ordinances. And then we hold a community workshop. They develop a list of things to work on for the coming year to increase their resilience. And then we stick with them for a year and we host implementation team meetings every month online to work through that list. And so in Southwest Virginia, as we're doing this discussion that we've held on the eastern side of the state repeatedly, some of the folks down there are saying, what do you mean by resilience? What are you talking about with resilience? We don't use that term. What does that mean? And then interesting enough, last week when I went up for this insurance roundtable, the speaker that was there, who used to be with FEMA for years, who developed the BRIC program, and then he's now with this Insurance Industry Association, he said, in talking to a survivor of the Paradise, California wildfire, that he said, a man there talking to him said, you keep talking about resilience. You're using this word. I don't know what this means. We don't use that word. To me, it's survivability. Survivability of me and my family and of my community. And I'm an economic contributor to my community. So I wanted to see, and if you could put comments in the chat box, does that resonate with you? Is resilience a term that you use in communicating with your publics, or do you use another term? In the raft, we interpret resilience writ large as social, economic, and environmental resilience, because you have to cover all of those. But is social resilience something that you talk about, and is it something that planners can help facilitate in your communities, you think? I would love to see comments either in the chat box, or I'm happy to leave my email too with you, Jillian. I'll tell you, it's EAA6, like the number 6, M, like mother, at Virginia, spelled out, .edu. I can put it in the chat box as well, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on, does resilience resonate with your community? What do you think of this term survivability, frankly? And can planners help to facilitate social and economic resilience as well as environmental resilience as part of your efforts?
And just a note to our attendees, if you'd prefer to, contribute to this part of the discussion out loud, again, more than welcome to use the raise hand feature and I can unmute you, but it looks like we're getting some responses.
Being ready in Bedford, that's simple. I love the simple message. Survivability, people don't ask what that term means. They ask what resilience means, right? And yet resilience has been such a handy kind of one-stop shopping term we've used for years now, but is there a better approach? We're really thinking the raft is the resilience adaptation feasibility tool. But we're really thinking about how do we present this to communities? Because if it doesn't resonate, we don't want to use it. So being ready is a good way to phrase it. The last thing I would ask of you all as a favor is, if you do have ideas about innovative programs, case studies that you think it would be helpful to include, please do let me know. Please do drop me a note or click on that little contact box at the top of the website. Oh my gosh. Maybe people watch episodes of The Walking Dead. I can't bring myself to watch episodes of The Walking Dead. I can't ask others to. Readiness in place of resilience in federal planning. That's interesting. All right, so Jillian, can you post to the general chat oh, you did. Of course you're on it. Thank you.
I did
My
in the chat, and I'll also send it out in the follow-up correspondence to all attendees, along with the link to the website and the link to the recording, which should be up on our YouTube in a few days. But yeah, please take advantage. I mean, I know Elizabeth has been very generous in, being a resource. So if you didn't get an opportunity to ask your question today or have any further input for Elizabeth, as I said, I know she's willing to be a resource.
Absolutely. And also, if you have specific, I love that note about for visual people, we need more stats and charts here. We can't have all this text. I can pull in more photos, but I would love to have some more charts. And so if you all know of good charts that summarize things well that I could plop in there that are publicly usable, I would love to see that. So please do send me a note in the contact us section with a link. I would love to include that because I do think that helps to break it up and visualize it better. Bar charts and graphs can be really handy tools. Um, readiness is a great term, and I see also resilience meaning long-term resilience, which is kind of like saying survivability, right? Going to be here for the long run. So thank you all for your time and your attention. I really appreciate it. I think we are at time, so I'm going to stop sharing.
Yes, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for sharing the guide and all the work that you've put into it. And thank you, everybody, for contributing to the discussion. I hope everybody has a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.